Well, welcome back to the Carrot Stick Podcast, a podcast series where we look to get under the skin of all things sales performance management and motivation to understand what makes our wonderful world of recruitment tick. Today, I'm sitting down with Joe Bungey, and I did check, it's not Bungey, it is Bungey, so I got that one right, as you'll find out at the very start of this episode. Joe is the operations director over at Mustard, a long-time client of OneUp, and so it felt like a really good chance to sit down with someone who's really involved in the details of team management and operations. Joe joined this business about 10 years ago and has risen up through the ranks all the way through to being a lead consultant for the US and now is the operations director for the entire business. We have a really good chat today about some of the more holistic philosophical pieces to being a successful professional in the recruitment world, down to setting goals and keeping a team motivated towards them, looking at how you approach daily disciplines in your life as well as habits that you form, and then end up talking a lot about data and specifically some little tactical elements around, for example, how you can construct really good RFPs and tender docs using the data that you hold. It's a very wide-reaching conversation. It was a very lovely one as well, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So let's get into it with Joe Bungey, Operations Director over at Mustard. Cool. So, Joe, thank you very much for jumping on. First and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your journey. Who is Joe Bungey? What is he? I'm saying that right, by the way. Is it Bungey?
You did say it right, yeah, which is unusual. So well done.
It's Bungey or
Bungey?
Yeah. I was like, that's a double check on that front. But okay, then Joe Bungey, tell us the story. What's been your journey so far through recruitment?
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. I would say my journey in recruitment is a pretty standard one in that, like many people, fell into it, didn't really know what it was when I started into it. In fact, so I studied architecture at uni, and that was because I was kind of arty and, wanted to carry on doing something creative, but I was also, I was a bit of a jack of all, didn't really know where I wanted to go with, and kind of fell into architecture. Wasn't sure if I wanted to be an architect or not, was still very much on the fence about it. For personal reasons, ended up moving to Bristol and came across this architectural recruitment agency in Bristol. So I put my CV in, thinking I might get some work as an architect. And instead, they called me up and said, we've seen you've done a bit of sales. Do you ever thought about doing recruitment? Would you like to come and find out what that's about? So I came along, and I was offered some architecture jobs at the time, but for terrible money and with not very much progression. So I thought I'd give it a go, and fully expecting that I would do it for 6 months and then maybe find something else. And here we are 10 years later and still working for the same guys. So I suppose maybe slightly uniquely, it's the only recruitment business I've ever worked for. I haven't moved around anywhere. I started as a consultant, initially building a desk for us in CGI and visualization, and then I moved over to a more traditional architecture desks, which was focused around the Southwest as a region. So that was great because we're in Bristol, and I could just walk out the door and go and see people, and I love face-to-face stuff, so that was brilliant for me. I used to get people in all the time and try and get out on the road as much as I could and go and meet people. Built up a desk and ran it for about 3 years. So, all the trials and tribulations of bringing on new clients and working with existing clients and trying to develop some accounts and all that kind of stuff, whilst hitting sales targets along the way. And, I enjoyed it a lot. And the reason that I kind of, stuck it out was because I was given opportunity. I was promoted to senior based on hitting the sales target, and then really quickly after that they were like, look, do you fancy having a go at managing some people and running a team? And so I had a go at that and did that billing manager thing for 2-3 years, and again really enjoyed that. Loved working with a small group of people. Then we got to COVID-y time, and just before then I was we were talking about moving CRM at the time. And I was quite heavily involved in that process. So just naturally ended up being more and more involved in ops because we went through a migration and I kind of led that. And so all of the kind of other bits of tech stack that kind of worked in and around that CRM change, I was quite heavily involved in, and kind of just took a step back from what I was doing. And just gradually over a period of kind of like 12, 18 months, ended up doing more and more of that and less day-to-day sales and day-to-day sales management. And, coming out of COVID, then I was officially made ops director. And at the same time, another guy who was here was made sales director. So we were kind of in a position where we were he was dealing with sort of day-to-day sales management, and I was basically dealing with everything else. And then he decided after a year that he didn't really want to do it anymore, because he didn't want to manage people and he didn't want to deal with the difficulties and challenges of that, I suppose.
Very political word. Nice.
Yeah. So he left. He stepped back into a principal role, and he didn't want to do management at all. And so I ended up in the kind of job I'm in now, which is I do ops and I manage that, but that's kind of fairly static now. It sort of does its own thing, and so day to day I'm doing lots of things. Sales management. I lead a couple of our newer divisions. I'm responsible for, I suppose, a bit of strategy and growth. I work with our back office and front office, and sort of day-to-day management of and oversight over the whole business in terms of moving forwards, basically. So I've kind of ended up in a roundabout way in that position I was in the beginning, where I'm a bit of a jack of all trades and doing lots and lots of things, which I really enjoy. But I didn't know that job existed when I started, and it's worked out really well.
Oh, nice. It's an interesting journey because, like you say, it's quite rare that you find people, I'd say more in modern recruitment, stick with one company for a long time in this case.
Yeah.
Like often they'll find themselves jumping around in the first few years, trying to settle down. So whereas for you, it's kind of the first one worked out, and here you are now as the ops stretch, and you've climbed your way all the way through the ranks.
Yeah, and generally, that's because I was asked this question quite recently. Actually, it's primarily down to the fact that the people here are, I walked into a business not really knowing anyone in Bristol, and the guys that own the business and that I work with now, have become really, really good friends. So, people at the end of the day is a reason number one. But aside from that, it's a nice little segue into the topic of this, really, which is talking about leadership and management. That the three founders just showed me opportunity and continually gave me what I was looking for as I went through. So, it was some small measurable goals of, okay, hit this target this year and then we'll get this, hit this target next year and then you'll get this. And then after 3-5 years, I got everything I wanted, and then I was given the opportunity to give that to other people. And now that's what you thrive on, I suppose, is seeing others rise through the ranks and go through the journey that you went on and take hold of the opportunity that you were given, which is the thing that I find kind of most fulfilling at the moment.
Awesome. Nice. Really good and exciting journey so far. Then I'm sure you've got plenty you can share about that journey then. And the three topics that you picked out, probably will touch on those. Definitely more, like I'd say, holistic and to a degree philosophical around that. The big one I want to start one really is big picture. Second one that you mentioned is consistency and habits, and we can talk about the data piece towards the end if you fancy it. Big picture, I think, is a really good way, as the name sort of suggests, it's stepping back a little bit and looking at what is the big picture here? Where is it that we're going? How do we get there? All that kind of good stuff. Very like high level and sort of guided in that sense. Let's kick off there then. That was one of the sort of topics you came for, so you'd like to speak about. So give me a take on that then. How is it that you approach the sort of big picture thinking and things like that in the business, or for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it goes right back to the journey of coming through as a consultant, and you don't really focus on what you might achieve in a week. You focus on what you can do in a quarter and in 12 months, basically, and have a target and work backwards. It's not rocket science in any way, but what people don't necessarily do often is think, okay, well, if I go even bigger than that, you talk about these big, hairy, angry goals. Look at something really, really
what
big.
A horrible acronym.
I know, it's awful, isn't it? Go really big and then work backwards from there. And for me, when I started, that was like, okay, well, it wasn't really that big an area at all, but it was, can I lead a small team to do $500,000 in a year or something, or at what stage can we get there? And then when it comes back to reporting into the people that I report to, rather than the conversation on a weekly basis being like, these guys didn't send enough CVs this week, or you didn't make enough phone calls, it's like, where are you on the journey to get to that thing that you want to get to? And it makes those conversations, I think, much easier to have, because okay, right, we ticked off 5% of our quarterly CV target this week, and we know therefore next week we've first of all, we've taken a step forward. It may be a small one or a big one or whatever, but we've still taken a step forward in the direction that we want to go. And those little positive movements, I think, reinforce on yourself, but also on the people that are around you. If you can kind of every week just be like, yeah, we're one step closer to this goal. And ultimately what happens is that probably half the time you don't hit those goals, or the goal completely changes and you go and do something else. There are plenty of times when, I was, running a team and had a 3 or 5 year plan to get somewhere, and actually, some curveball comes in and I end up not focusing on that team at all anymore. I was doing something else. But then I think as long as you feel some sense of purpose and direction towards moving somewhere, that kind of gives you fulfillment, and it gives the people around you fulfillment, and it makes them feel like they're responsible for something and heading in the right direction. You know what I mean?
Well, help me to that a little bit more tactical then, because I imagine there's probably some people who would sit here and listen to that and be like, yeah, that's all well and good, and it's nice to kind of think about it that way. But the reality is, especially over the last 2 years, things have been really, really tough. And it's all good saying, oh, we missed a little bit this week, but here's where we're actually going. Here's the long term. Therefore, don't worry about the short term.
Yeah.
It's all well and good when those weeks bubble up into them being you missing that overall longer term target. And then it's like, oh shit, now what do we do? So how have you guys approached that? I imagine the last 2 years haven't been dead easy for you guys either. Like, how have you guys approached those difficult moments when you realize, actually, we're going to miss those long term goals. We're going to have to make changes, and things aren't going to be as easy and straightforward as we thought.
Yeah. So totally agree with you. And was very conscious when thinking about this that I didn't want to come across as hypocritical in any way, because it's been really tough the last couple of years, and a lot of the big picture stuff, like we talk about, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, and you're exactly right. We haven't hit targets for sales targets, business wide sales targets for the last couple of years, and that has
Just either, don't worry.
That has been really difficult, and there's no sugarcoating it, and it is really tough standing up in front of the business on a monthly basis, looking over numbers and saying that we didn't hit that this month, but we're going to go again next month, and we're going to try again, and continuing to do it on a day-to-day basis. But I have to believe in the process of turning up and being there and being present and saying the same message and being consistent in what we do, because I've seen results from it. And, ultimately there are bigger picture market factors. And so when it comes down to the answer of your question, I suppose the bigger picture right now is understanding that we're doing exactly what we can in a market that's really tight and really competitive and really difficult, but also understanding bigger picture that it has to come back, because it's come back before and it will come back again. So not panicking and not being too concerned by, albeit what's been a long and painful process over the last sort of 18 months. But having faith and having belief in the small habits and actions that get up to the bigger picture, if that makes sense.
And I'm sure we'll come on to that, because one of your topics was the consistency and habits piece as well. Some of the notes that you put down when we were talking about that big picture stuff before we did this podcast was writing that shit down regularly was one thing that you said. Is that more about, for you, that physical action of writing something down just helps reinforce that it's a thing that you're definitely committed to?
Yeah.
Is it something you're having the whole team do? Like, what does that look like at Mustard?
Bit of both. So it's just super cheesy, but it does work. Like, and if I hadn't have done it and seen results from it, I probably wouldn't be a real advocate of it, but I have, and it does work. And so on a personal level, that looks like I've got a little notebook sat next to my bed at home, and on a Sunday night as I'm going to sleep, I just write down a couple of things that I want to get done in the week. Do I do it every Sunday? No, probably not. But I try and do it as much as I possibly can. And I always find that when I do it, the week is better than it was if I didn't. So, that's just a little small thing I have. And in that, I will look at like, okay, how am I doing against where I want to be in a year and 3 years? And it's interesting in that that's not just work goals, that's personal stuff, and looking back over it, which I did do fairly recently, look back over what I wrote down, 6-7 years ago as to what I wanted to have achieved. And that wasn't really work stuff, to be fair. That was like, buy a house, get married, have kids, and have those people be happy and healthy and all that sort of stuff I've done. And, if I hadn't, it's nice to look back over it and be like, oh, I think past Joe would have been quite pleased with where I got to right now, and give yourself a bit of satisfaction as a result of that. With regards to what we do at Mustard, so there's our financial year is October to September. So we're just nearly 2 months into this one. At the beginning of every year, around this kind of time, in line with, New Year's resolutions and all that sort of stuff, we get everybody in the business to write down some goals and some targets on 2 bits of paper. We put them in a sealed envelope, and they put one in their drawer and we keep one back, and then we open them up again in a year's time, and we say, this is what you wrote down, how are you getting on, did we get anywhere, did we not? The one they've got in their drawer, they can chuck it in the bin if they don't care about it, but the point of actually doing it is to hold yourself accountable to those things that you want to do, and the little actions that you want to do that get you there. And look, does it work all the time? No. And do people, some people find it cheesy, yes, but that's kind of the name of the podcast is carrot and stick, right? And some people want the carrot, some people want the stick, some people need a bit of both, and that is a technique that works for some people, and for the people it works for, it's great.
I think for anyone who looks at anything like that as kind of particularly cheesy, I always think like, some people who might be like proper, like hard sales types, just like, right, get on the phone. It's all about calling. It's all about people. It's about relationships. Start talking. There'll be others who look at that kind of thing and say, well, that's really cheesy. It's so like classically 80s boiler sales room sort of type. And it's like, well, different needs to different creeds. If it works for someone, then great. Why discourage it at the end of the day is sort of my thinking. It's more when someone tries to force a particular like belief or way of doing something on everybody else, it then becomes a bit of like, well, if that doesn't motivate that person, doesn't work for them, it's a different conversation. Not saying you guys are doing that, but more of people need to know what it is and what kind of environments they fit best into to be able to buy into that sort of stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think I think probably much like yourself, you've got to try and have an overall strategy that doesn't necessarily change, but then within the way that you manage individual people within that and around that framework, there's obviously totally different ways of speaking to people and target setting people and reviewing people and putting people under pressure or not putting people under pressure and all that sort of stuff.
Totally. Cool. One other note that you made that I thought was quite interesting, you mentioned running. You're a runner by the sounds of it then.
Yeah, and funny again, I don't want to come across as like a hypocrite, because I think if you look at my running...
You don't run every single day.
Well, if you look at my running stats over the last 2 months, they've been pretty terrible, to be honest. But yeah, I think... So particularly in that point of time where I was, building up to, especially as a billing manager, I found it like really important. I was training for a marathon and signed it. So context is I was sat around... went back to my folks for Christmas 2019, and I was sat in the pub with a load of mates on Christmas Eve, and me and a mate goaded each other into signing up for a marathon in Paris in the March that next year, so March 2020.
As you do.
And yeah, as you do. And so we both signed up in the pub on Christmas Eve, and then started training for it all through that winter. Got myself a little 12-week training plan. I was running through that, and then COVID happened, obviously. So March 2020 became October 2020, which was really annoying because it was only 6 months away. So you couldn't really stop training. I had to just kind of carry on. So I then carried on doing the training platform, and I changed it from 12 weeks to 6 months. And then it got pushed back again by another 6 months. And then again by another 6 months. So I was basically doing a marathon training program for 18
2
months.
Years.
Yeah.
Yes, 18 months, yeah.
And eventually got it out of the way, decided I didn't want to do it anymore for about 2 months. After that, I gave up on running completely. But what I think the important thing about it is it's kind of relevant to what we just spoke about, to be honest, about, having a constantly shifting goal and having to be able to deal with that and deal with objections that come in your way. So that in itself was quite important for me. But the whole process of setting out a plan of like, okay, this is 12 weeks, this is a quarter, and I know that in this quarter, the ultimate goal at the end of it is to do a marathon. But the bits the component parts that get there are, I need to run a gradually increasing number of miles every week. I need to do some sprint sessions. I need to do some easy ones. I need to generally manage pace and make sure that I'm not getting putting too much into my legs, so that when it gets there, you've got enough in the tank, and really looking for like small weekly improvements rather than big leaps and big jumps and stuff. And that in itself is exactly the same as sales and recruitment. All those little lessons, I think, are exactly the same thing of having a bigger goal, breaking it down into smaller parts, looking at marginal gains along the way. Can we improve on training? Can we improve on productivity by the data that we give to people, or the volume of calls that we make? You brought it up earlier, like lots and lots of little 1% increases. I mean, this is absolute textbook sales speak, but it's all stuff that that I genuinely have seen results from, and the things that are important to us.
Mm. I mean, you speak about those little gains, and that's all about the sort of consistency piece that you've loosely touched on here as well. I guess it kind of now ties into that habits conversation before. One of the lines that you wrote down actually around this piece was do a little bit of the job every day. What do you mean by that?
I think we are a 360 recruitment business. We don't have anybody who isn't a 360 consultant, and we never really have, to be honest. We've intermittently.
Any reason for that? Out of curiosity?
We tried. We've intermittently tried to bring on resources and people at sort of different levels, and we've never seen any success from it. But also, I think we find like recruitment in itself, like you get so much more success from business development by understanding a network, and you don't really understand the network if you don't go and do the research and the resourcing and the speaking to candidates. So it's sort of we found it really hard to disconnect the two. And the ones that are really, really successful, that have been really successful for us in the past, are the ones who get references and referrals and leads and all that kind of stuff that actually really just comes from candidate work anyway. It doesn't really come from the client work. And so when you're going out and prospecting and cold calling people, you're not really cold calling people because you've got a reason to do it, because you've spent the last year building up a network of candidates who then become clients or know clients or all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of one side to it. The other bit, I suppose, sorry, I'm just going to pause you. My phone was ringing. I should have shut that off.
Good. Distracted, I think.
In terms of the little bit of the job every day bit. So as I say, we are all 360, and we have all trained and come through that way. And I think that means if you're a good 360 consultant, you have to do every part of the job. You can't stop doing candidate work because suddenly your loop breaks and you realize in 2 weeks you haven't got any jobs coming through, and you're trying to understand why. So you have to do that something of everything every day, and that might be personal branding, it might be sales calls, it might be references, it might be candidate searching or sourcing it, but all those small little things. And what tends to happen is, you might go through a day where you don't necessarily feel like you've achieved a lot, but if you keep doing those little things over a long period of time, it all adds up, and you tend to get then more inbound as a result. That's kind of what we preach and what we found.
Makes sense. I was recording a podcast episode this morning, actually, with Greg Savage from Australia, and we were speaking there about consistency of doing a number of things like this. Really, it's one of those things that end up dropping away. And a good example of it was like on some days, someone will be saying, right, I've got 5 client meetings to go and do today, which means I can't do those other little bits and bobs. But as long as you know throughout the week that there's accountability being held on, I will get those things done at some point this week, just to make sure that they're still being kept on the go. You don't end up in a situation then like where for the last couple of years, a lot of recruiters fell into, which was 21 and 22 were amazing. You had loads of business coming in. It was like, I haven't got to do any cold calling, like I'm fine. Yeah. Problem then being, as soon as we hit 23, 24, where suddenly cold calling is required, and you haven't done that skill for a couple of years, if ever, if someone's been hired in during that sort of golden age of recruitment, they're just completely lost when that skill really is called upon. So staying fresh on it, I think, and doing a little bit of the job every day, like you say, is actually really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And it's something that the guy, the guys that founded the business, it was just innate to them, and therefore it's become a habit that I do, and hopefully the people that are sat around me pick up on that as well.
It's cool. And another big one, like, it's a word that I think overall is kind of associates to being, what it means really is being quite hardy, being stoic is the word that you put down here as well. Stoicism and how stoic approach to life creates a better manager. Curious to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, this is a bit again where I didn't want to sound like a dickhead at all, but Stoicism is...
You're prefacing every single line you wrote in here with "don't want to be a dickhead."
Yeah. Sorry.
Here it is.
Stoicism is in short, obviously the concept that you focus on the bits you can control, and that you don't worry about the other bits, and that is really the core of what that means, I suppose. The idea of like I would sort of naturally quite like a level person, never really too up and never really too down, and that in itself I think is a really important characteristic to have as a recruiter, because you don't get too emotionally invested in anything you're doing, and therefore you don't let it piss you off when it goes south, as it inevitably will, or you don't let yourself get too confident when things are going really well and then take your foot off the gas. You've got to be that sort of like level mindset. The stoic thing, it's just the way that I've things I believe in are you just don't worry about something if you can't do anything about it. And if something's been and gone, then leave it and move on. I think I've always been I just really like Darren Brown and all of his stuff. And he's got this book called P. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Haven't, no.
It's basically just about Stoicism. But it's about kind of like the various like views on it and the way that it formed his opinions on what it means to be happy. And a lot of it is about how hard work provides you fulfillment and happiness. And if you're not working hard, then it's very difficult to achieve that. And that stress is a positive thing if you use it in the right way. But that was a really important read for me at one point. I think it was probably an audiobook when I was running, actually. I don't think I sat down and read it, but there's a lot of things in that I take on board and bring into life and would speak to the people around me about and speak to my kids about, stuff like that.
There's a book, I can't remember what the book was called or the name of the author was. I want to say it was the Happiness Formula or something like that. And the formula basically was that this guy had sat down and figured out, it's a very simple formula, happiness equals expectation minus reality. If your expectations are up here and you only get to there, you're going to be disappointed and you'll feel pretty downtrodden about it. Whereas if your expectation is here and you get there, you feel good, you've achieved it. Or if they're a little bit lower and you obviously far exceed that, you feel fantastic because you've reached your own expectations, is the idea. And you sort of came onto it a little bit earlier on around like goal setting and having a direction. One thing that I speak about an awful lot is that I think as humans, we're very conditioned to move the goalposts, right? You often say things like, I'll be happy when I've got my own house. Then you are about to finish completing on that house and start doing it up. And already thinking about, I'll be happy when I go on that nice holiday, or I can afford that nice car, or I can do X, I can do Y. And there's always this constant pursuit of happiness or a goal that you keep on moving the goalposts on, so you never really quite get there, which is what leads to a lot of, I think, discontent and frustration in a lot of people. So kind of coming back to what you're saying there around the whole like happiness formula away, it all ties together and it all builds into one piece, is being able to appreciate where you've got to and the goals that you've achieved so far, even if it means opening up a silver envelope once a year to kind of see, here, what did I say I was going to do, and here's what I've done, and I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. I think I have these little moments where I'm just sort of thinking, what would I think if I could see myself now a year ago, or what would I think if I could see myself now 5 years ago? And I think a lot of the time I'd be like, yeah, you've done pretty well done.
It's so easy to focus on things you haven't done. I didn't start going to the gym as much as I thought I would, or I didn't manage to get that promotion I wanted, or whatever else it might be. It's so easy to focus on the bad parts, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But in terms of that, it's so nice to be able to look back on that thing that you wrote down 5 years ago and be like, I didn't hit it all. I didn't get all of that sort of stuff, but I got some of it, and that's cool. And if I hadn't written down anything, I might not have gotten anything. And it's interesting, that expectation reality thing, because obviously when you're setting goals and targets for people, the mindset a lot of the time is, if you want someone to do this, you need to set the target up here, because if you didn't do that and you set it here, then they might only do this bit. And I do believe that is true to some extent, and I would always set my targets higher than I want to achieve. But at the same time, it's nice to have that thing in the back of your mind of like, yes, I've got this ultimate goal, but this is my, like, I'd be pleased with this. Like, and if I look back on it, I'd be like, yeah, I did a good job there. I'd be fine with that. And I think it's
also not setting a target.
Yeah,
and also not setting a target so high that it people look at it and go, that's just not achievable.
Yeah, sure.
If something feels so far out of reach, and it's just like, well, why even bother trying in the first place, right? You're setting someone to fail by setting a target that's too high, which I guess kind of ties quite nicely into the third point you mentioned around data and how you guys use it at Mustard as well, but also a piece towards personal life. We're focused on that quite a lot today as well. When it comes round to how you think about things like KPIs or targets or whatever else you want to call them inside the business, what's the company, or I guess your philosophy on those?
We're pretty simple. We're very much KPIs, and unapologetic about that. However, it's a pretty simple structure, which is effectively you got a financial target, and to some degree, if you're hitting your financial target, then kind of don't really worry about it. Do what you want, do what you like, do how you like, and especially if you're going above and beyond that, then great. You get pretty much full autonomy, unless you're getting like bad NPS or something like that. That's the thing where you'd step in and maybe have a look at it, or you just do it. You can see that there's something about the way that that's being done that isn't right. But actually, the people that we recruit are all like-minded and fairly team-minded and fairly selfless, and there's a kind of mustard personality of someone who's not the typical salesperson, I suppose. So we find that very, very rarely. But generally, we just work back from there. So, if you're not hitting your sales target, okay, well, are we getting enough interviews booked? If we are, but we're not converting, then okay, well, cool. How can we work with you to make sure that conversion is better? If we're not getting enough interviews booked, well, are we sending enough out the door? If we're not sending enough out the door, are we getting enough jobs on? If we're not getting enough jobs on, are we making enough phone calls? Are we doing enough outbound work? Or are we not, so what I said earlier, are we not doing the candidate stuff well enough? Are we not building a network properly and getting under the skin of, who the decision makers are in this, and getting leads and references and referrals from all that sort of stuff? Are we not doing the personal branding piece enough to make sure that, people actually know who you are? And then, if none of that is happening, then saying, okay, well, where actually are you in your journey? Are you sub 6 months, and are you still, demonstrating decent work ethic and all that kind of stuff? So we kind of try and give a really easy platform right the way back to the beginning, and ultimately try and get people to buy into managing themselves on that. This thing I heard somewhere, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, you sit down in a review and you say, look, someone in this room has got to micromanage you. It could be me or it could be you, but if it's me, then it's probably not going to last very long. And I always think about that a lot. You've got to hold yourself accountable to the numbers, because ultimately, if you've got somebody there cracking a whip over your shoulder and hitting you with a stick, I suppose, as it were, then it might work for some people, but I would say quite rarely. It's got to come from within, and it's got to come from that hunger and ambition and that desire and that why and that big picture stuff that you'll hold yourself to push it forwards.
Yeah, that's where the whole conversation about being a manager versus a coach comes in, I guess, as well, right? Versus saying to someone, go and do 20 phone calls, and then being like, well, if they themselves don't understand why that is a metric they're being held to, then it's a little bit like, well, whatever, I'm not motivated to do it. Whereas if you're sat down with someone and asking them, right, you've got to make this much money this quarter, how many placements does that look like because of your average fee? Okay, it's this amount, cool. How many interviews does that mean? That means this many, cool. How are you going to get that to that point? Probably got to send this many CVs based on historic data. Okay, how many jobs, how many calls, like you said? And then really it's getting them to say, okay, I know now that if I want to hit my number, if I'm going to hit that target and the commission I want to earn, be a successful recruiter, I need to be doing 50, 60 phone calls a day. That's them kind of realizing it for themselves. But one thing I'd always reflect on in that is never being the one to tell them the number, it's asking them the question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how many CVs should you be sending? How many phone calls should you be making? And that's on them to answer, because then they're the ones, like you say, setting the accountability. It's not you telling them make those calls, it's them saying, I need to make those calls, right?
And it's funny because I think that thing is like almost, that seems like the way that it should be done, in my opinion, and the way that I was, I came through and saw success, but it's almost a little bit frowned upon now. And I still don't really understand the kind of no KPI thing. I don't really get how you can be in a performance-based sales job and not have a target. And
there's a really good line actually that Greg Savage said earlier, because he said exactly the same. He said it baffles me that I see job ads that are out there for recruitment roles where it says, oh, we're a no KPI environment. He said it's like selling someone a cruise and saying we're so confident in our ship we haven't got lifeboats. Like it's really funny. It's going to stick with me for a long time, that analogy, because it's so true. It's like saying, oh, everything's completely fine. Like, we've got total faith in the business and in you. Like, we don't need to measure things. It'll be okay. And it's like, I get what people are trying to do when saying it. They don't want to create this environment where it feels like it's a boiler room where you're being micromanaged. But the micromanagement of KPIs and KPIs themselves are two very, very different things. Yeah. And I think that's something that we've got very far away from as an industry, that we need to kind of realize and actually address and say, actually, there's a much better way to use KPIs here that we aren't really currently doing, or most people don't truly understand.
Yeah, it's definitely that pressure thing. I think the people that succeed are the people that, or I've seen succeed in this business, are the people that actually put the pressure on themselves, and that use it positively, and that use that stress like in a positive way, and use it to motivate them not to become an anxiety inducing thing that ends up pushing them towards failure rather than success. Um, and ultimately it's a tough job and it's really difficult, and there are people for whom it's not the right job, and that's absolutely fine. And
it's such a hard balance to find, right? Because at the end of it's a sales job at the end of the day, and sales is always stressful. It's why it's essential to earn big money versus so many other roles out there in the world. It's going to be hard. It's going to be stressful. And I think some people thrive under a little bit of that stress. Not to the level where you're like fearing for your job every single day, of course not. Yeah. But knowing there's the expectation that you will deliver is, I think, a big part of the role, and you have to thrive in that kind of environment.
Yeah, and that's also fulfilling, not just in terms of money and commission, but in terms of just personally fulfilling when you hit something and you achieve something and you hit a target, and that's why it's stressful along the way to get there, because ultimately the endorphins you get at the end are kind of worth it. Do you know what I mean?
Totally, yeah, totally. What I really like actually in the data section of this is you put something really specific and very tactical. And I love things that are specific and tactical, because we can talk about like the high level stuff all day, but when people listen to podcasts, often it's to try and learn something or realize something. And the one that you put here was using data to produce better RFPs and tender documents. That's so specific. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I say, we are pretty data heavy and we are KPI heavy, and we do measure almost everything that we could possibly measure. Not that we really look at it all the time, but we have the data there if we need to. And so when it comes to pitching for,
if I look at your one-up, is it going to be very busy?
I think so. Yeah, there's a lot of metrics in there, a lot of metrics, and a lot of conversions as well, which I made, which I barely look at, to be honest. But I think generally there's a movement towards becoming a better like service industry in the recruitment industry. Especially over the last 2 years, when I've seen stats that 20-30% of UK recruitment professionals are no longer in the industry, and we have to become adaptable and adjustable to what happens in the market in the next year. And I think part of that is, I was just at this event last week where they were sort of comparing the recruitment industry to the law industry, and how we both provide a professional service, but one is very prestigious and it charges very high fees, and the other is very there's a very low barrier to entry, which I would in no way consider removing. I think it's a great thing. You don't think you need a high barrier at all, but as a result, perhaps we don't value our service in the same way. So when it comes back to the RFP thing and the retained work thing, being able to provide data historically on positions that we've taken on in your industry, in your geography, over the past 12 months, over the past 24 months, looking at like talent maps of these are the number of professionals in this sector with this job title in this geo that can get to you, that can do this job. Like we've access to that data within 10 minutes, and it takes us zero effort whatsoever to produce that and send that to a client. Yet a lot of recruitment professionals don't do it because they want to hold on to that because they feel that that's their IPO, you know what I mean? Whereas I think if you give that up at the first instance and say, look, this is your talent pool, this is what you're looking at, this is how many people are there, this is our data on, our success rate and our fill rate on time to fill on previous jobs, straight away, then they're looking at it like, okay, this is, I almost kind of know what I'm going to get out of this, or if it's even worth me going down the line with this business or not. And even if you don't win that tender or that RFP at that point, I've found that you tend to get the call back next time, because you're kind of going above and beyond a little bit. And then when it comes to winning work, ultimately we want to complete on everything that we take on, but we don't, and no recruitment business does really. I don't believe. But the jobs that we don't fill on, or complete on, if we can demonstrate along that process that this is the process we've followed, we've outreach to X number of people, we had an X percentage of response rate, these are the people that weren't interested and why, this is your kind of report on the work that we've done, and document that to them in a articulate way, then I feel like a lot of the time people are a lot more comfortable paying for upfront work because they're actually seeing some return from it, even if you don't complete, which ultimately I would like, you are incentivized to complete on that work anyway, and I would like to, but even if you don't, you leave that client in a better place than you found them. And I think that's something that we can do much more of, is provide that and therefore justify fees up front, which we don't do enough
It's
of.
very much like a service offering, isn't it? And trying to differentiate yourself from your competitors more than anything. Because we're a software company and actually get approached all the time by recruiters about engineering roles, for example. Even if we aren't hiring, I'll hear about them all the time. And the leading USP so many come forward with is, our rates are 17%, our rates are 14%, whatever it might be, which to a degree, there's a piece around like discounting value enough that it kind of shows that your services can be pretty quick and pretty cheap. That's why there's always a debate about, if your price is too low, people devalue your service, versus if it's too high, they won't be able to afford it. You've got to find that bit in the middle. Like what you're essentially saying here is you're being able to leave us saying, look, okay, our rates aren't super cheap, nor do we take payment at the end. We'll take some of it up front. However, we will give you transparency into the process, so you know exactly what it is that we're doing for you. It's not a case of, we'll find you some CVs and send them over to you as and when we find them if you come across the right person. It's like, no, here's the reports that you'll get along the way, so you can see the service we're giving you is an actual service and not just a CV factory off our database, right? Which I think is quite cool.
And then even if you don't send anyone, they feel like there's still money well spent, because they get some value from it, and they can see, okay, we've actually got some actionable information that we can take back to the board or whoever to say, look, this is the search that we've run, and this is the reason why we can't fill this position, or we haven't been able to fill it so far. What can we do to change it? Which ultimately is that recruitment consultant piece, that we should be consultants on how to recruit, not just salespeople, which is the 360 thing again. And that's why we breed 360 people, and we always have them.
To sort of tail on this, then, one of the other pieces was making better data-driven decisions. Again, I think data-driven decisions has been a phrase for as long as the industry has existed, it feels, at this point. But what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, we have one of the founders is an FD who loves a spreadsheet, and in his world we wouldn't use OneUp or a CRM. We would just have everything in Excel, and that would be great. Which obviously doesn't necessarily work, but he's always looked at conversions and numbers, and sets our budgets every year, which I'm now obviously quite actively involved in. He's sort of transitioning out of the business at the moment, but that mindset has always been a part of how we make decisions when it comes to hiring, when it comes to performance management, when it comes to promoting people or not promoting people, or putting people into a principal role or putting people into a team leadership role. Ultimately, some of that is based on gut feel and the opportunity that comes up at the time, but we try where possible to be pragmatic and to be level-headed and use what's in front of us to therefore not panic and not push the button one way or the other, depending on what the last 2 weeks have looked like. But again, look at the bigger picture and look at where we've been over the last 12 months and where we hope to be in the next 24 months. So that's kind of a really vague answer, I suppose. In terms of actionable action, we look at it particularly for like new business, I suppose. We look at it, by way of having groups of, so I've just looked back over all of we've been running for 15 years. I've just looked back over all of our client spend over the last 15 years, who, to try and understand who to target from a point of view of retaining existing business, looking at those that have kind of gone off the boil a little bit over the last 2 years, looking at those that haven't spent at all over the last 5 years, but did at the beginning, and really, because ultimately that's the best source of new business, is the people that you already know and the people that you already work with, especially when you've been running for 15 plus years. That's you've kind of touched or gone over a lot of these people already, right? And that's not just from a point of view of spend, that's from a point of view of who have we booked interviews with but not closed on, who have we signed terms with but never actually completed on, who have we had jobs with, so looking back over all the metrics and then using that as part of the approach. So going back to the data thing, rather than then just saying, okay, because of this is a target client, it's then going to that target client with that information to say, look, we've taken on, 5 jobs and we filled none of them over the past 12 months. Who in operations can I speak to about how we can do a better job for you, or what your perception of us is in the market, or who can I speak, or for a client we've done a really good job with, how can we deliver it for cheaper, or how can we deliver it for faster or easier or whatever it is, and tailoring your approach to those people based on the actual data that you've got in front of you, rather than it just being a generic, I'm just calling you because you're a client who hasn't spent with us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, totally. And I've referenced it a few times already. It's something me and Greg spoke about on the podcast earlier this morning when I recorded it as well. And one thing he loves asking people is, who are your best clients? And they'll give him a list of, here are 10 clients that the most revenue from, see the most success with. And the first thing he'll always ask after that is, when did you last meet them? And it always shocks him often people say, we haven't met them. Because as much as there's the data and the logical side of things, the emotional side of we've done business together. Should we get a coffee? It'd be nice to actually have a proper chat now we've done business together. Or if we only ever spoke over one phone call and everything else has been via email, when the shit hits the fan and things start getting tough, who do you think they're not going to work with anymore? Yeah. Probably those that they don't know. Those that they've got that connection and that network with are the ones they're more likely to stay in touch with and therefore do more repeat business with. And it is one thing I think that probably to a degree has definitely changed since COVID. People are now more keen to not go see each other in person. Although I think there's a bit of a resurgence of that coming back now, where people are more like, should we get a coffee? Sick and tired of Zoom calls. I'd rather actually meet in person. It is probably a piece to be said there around, although data is super important, also around relationship building, right? And making sure that's strong and healthy, even though you can't strictly measure that.
Yeah, massively. And that is something that we measure. We look at face-to-face meetings.
Number of meetings.
Number of face-to-face versus virtual and this kind of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do you see a correlation there for those that you do spend more time face-to-face with versus those that you don't?
Yeah, and generally in terms of success, the people who are the most successful are the people that do the most face-to-face. There's
there you go. Interesting.
There is an absolute correlation there. And I said it before, I was lucky in that I had a Southwest desk. I did Bristol in the Southwest, so I did it all the time as a consultant. And, when I had candidates who were accepting an offer, I made a little pact that I wouldn't let them accept an offer unless they came in and signed a contract in person with me and I was looking them in the eye.
Nice.
And I definitely think it affected dropout rates. It didn't, I didn't get anywhere near as many dropouts as perhaps people did if they didn't do that process. It's very difficult to do when you're dealing with people that are in the US or whatever. I appreciate that's going to be tough, but I've been trying to get out on the road as much as I can over the last few months. I'm in London once a month, trying to meet with as many people as I can. I think it's really important, and we do actually, really advocate that. I suppose the only thing that puts it off is, we're a B Corp, which was something that we achieved last year and really proud of, and it's really important to us in terms of the purpose that we have as directors and the people that work for us as well. And it is a little bit difficult to justify getting on a plane to, the States to go and see some people over there when you can just meet them on virtually. So that is a consideration that we're working through, and how we do that. How do you make it commercially viable versus sustainable and all the rest of it as well? So yeah,
if it was an easy answer, everyone would have figured it out by now, and I'm sure that'd be the perfect balance of face to face versus online. But it is hard to identify when it's best to do those things. 100%. Always a fun one. I mean, we've gone on for about 50 minutes or so now, I think, as well. So we want to start bringing things to a close soon. But before then, I do have a few quick questions for you, more the quick fire round that I don't brief people on too much.
Yep.
First one, favorite book that you've read that's helped you in your professional life?
I mentioned it actually. We didn't talk about it, but I've read it a couple of times. It's a book called Legacy by James Kerr. It's about the Kiwi, the All Blacks.
Really need to read that. It's been on my list for so long.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy. It's not a long book at all, and it's just some key little messages from it. But one of them, the one that sticks with me always, is the thing they say, which is sweep the sheds. So before they do anything, it's the responsibility of everyone to go and clean out the sheds and sweep the floor. I always think that, little things like that. Come in and empty the dishwasher, or wherever it is. It's a totally minor thing, but you start the day off with a with a little task like that, puts the rest of the facility and the rest of the business in perspective, and grounds you a little bit. And that's always a takeaway I've had from that.
It's a very sporting analogy as well, but mainly for football, is like leave the shirt better than you found it. It's kind of the way of expressing that. It's like always needs to leave the place better than when you found it, which is exactly like sweeping the shed, I guess, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said about clients as well, if you don't fill the job, at least do a good job for them and leave them in a better place than you found them. Give them something.
It's a really boring, wanky business statement, but like add value in a way, isn't it? Kind of give them something that leaves a positive impression.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, nice. Favorite podcast? If you listen to podcasts, favorite podcast? Can't say this one.
It's not anything to do with recruitment, to be honest. But I've actually gone off podcast a little bit. But I for a long time, me and a couple of mates were big into Tail Enders, which is a cricket podcast with James Anderson and Felix from the Maccabees and Greg James, and it's very funny. It's good. And a guy from Bristol called Matchin, who we've bumped into it a couple of times at various places.
Nice, awesome. I always hate using this word. I say it every single podcast as well. Favorite influencer on LinkedIn that you like taking content or insight from?
Oh, good question. I'm trying to get back into it, to be honest, in terms of my personal brand, and I find I try and spend as little time as possible actually on there, put content on there, and engage with stuff in a really short period of time, and then just get out quickly before it sucks you in. So I can't really think of anyone, in all honesty.
Fair enough.
Yeah, sorry.
Just general people on there. I'll check your comments on there and see what you've been commenting recently, and that'll give me the answer I need.
All right, fine,
yeah. And this is quite a fun one. I ask this every single episode as well. Favorite horror story? It can be about you, someone you know, someone that's quite far removed from yourself, just like a story that you just think about and cringe every time you think about it, or that makes you laugh.
It's like
either or. There's been some brilliant ones.
A recruitment story, or
ideally, yeah.
It's actually
we've had people caught like in sexual acts in offices. We've had people basically trying to give it the big I am and then basically losing a multi-100,000-pound client. All kinds of horror stories along the way. It's been brilliant.
I haven't got anything like that, but the one I thought of is actually probably a little bit more gutting, to be honest, which is just, it was like the worst week I've ever had in this job, which we have this clause in our terms, which is the one that everybody always asks to take out. The first thing you send over, it's like, we'll get rid of this clause, please. We'll take that out. And the clause is about if a client makes an offer to a candidate, and the candidate accepts the offer, if between then and them starting, the client then pulls the offer, then they're liable to pay a cancellation fee.
I see. And they always want that out.
And I always say no, because of this week where it happened to me 3 times with 3 different clients in the same week.
No way.
And it was like...
Well, was that leading into COVID or something?
No, it wasn't. It was purely, all of it was totally unrelated. Well, I mean,
wow.
I think it was anyway, unless someone was conspiring against me or something. But, these are candidates who had handed in their notice and were waiting to start a job, and they were all in Bristol, and I had to meet them all, and tell them, like, this job that you've got isn't starting anymore.
That's horrific.
And the first one was bad because she started crying. And then I got the call about the second one, and I was like, this is too good to be true. And then by the time I'd done it the 3rd time in the space of a week, I was like totally numb to it.
You're just ready to get hit by lightning at that point.
Basically. And that was, it was a proper miserable week in the job. But as a result, I always make them keep the cancellation clause in, because I'm not going through that again.
Got to do the miserable stuff, but at least you get paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. And you get something out of it at least.
Yeah, fair.
And good news is, well, the positive is I managed to place those people in other jobs, or certainly at least 2 of them. So they got something out of it. But yeah, at the time, it was pretty world ending.
Nice. Well, not nice, but you get the gist. And then the final question I'll ask then: if you could give advice to someone who's just stepped into a management or leadership role recently and is looking for a bit of advice from someone that's got a couple of years behind them now, what's the one piece of advice you would give?
Turn up is the one, and I think I wrote that a few times or certainly in my own bits before this. Like, you're not gonna succeed every day. you're possibly not going to succeed every week or even every month. At the moment it's really tough, but you got to turn up, and you got to be there, and you got to be present, and you've got to be consistent with the people around you and level, and you've got to show consistency, and you've just got to be there and be the one that people look at for a sign of okay, this is why I'm here and this is what I'm doing, and I believe that process. That's the main reason that I kind of stuck it out, is because the people around me just kind of turned up every day and did a little bit of the job every day. Like I said, it's really important.
Nice, love that. Awesome. Well, that's all I've really got to ask. Any kind of shout outs or plugs you want to make? Follow you on LinkedIn, maybe?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm trying to be more active on there.
He will post. You can see his post and it'll disappear, but exactly. That's what you got to
know. Yeah. Get me on LinkedIn. And obviously in terms of what we do, we're a primarily creative business, so architecture, interior design, graphics, marketing, and we're doing a little bit more tech as well. So if you're getting involved in any of that sort of stuff, let us know.
Awesome. That's amazing. Joe, thank you so much. Been a really interesting hour or so, and all the best for the run up to Christmas.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.